This episode is about the number 2 team on the Juggernaut Index, the New Orleans Saints. The 2009 New Orleans Saints were basically playing a next-generation game. At times, it seemed unfair. As New England coach Bill Belichick said just a few days before his team was demolished in Week 12, "They're as good as anybody we face. There are no weaknesses, the players are good, the coaches are good, the schemes are difficult." The schemes, in fact, were practically unsolvable. Drew Brees described them this way in a mid-season interview with ESPN's David Fleming. "We're going to try and formation you to death and personnel you to death." And it's just what they did. The Saints presented an endless variety of pre-snap looks, then tortured opponents with motion, misdirection, and aggressive play calling. At the controls of the offense, they had the game's most accurate passer. Preparing for New Orleans was nearly impossible, like preparing for visitors from the future. Here's what Tom Brady had to say after his Patriots lost to the Saints by 3 touchdowns. "There's obviously a big gap between us. It wasn't nearly as competitive as we were expecting. Fantasy owners don't actually have to game plan for anyone, of course, so we don't have anything to fear from New Orleans. All we're trying to do is identify NFL offenses that will yield significant statistical returns." The Saints led the league in both scoring and total yardage in 2008, then repeated the feat in 2009 en route to the Super Bowl. This offense finished 4th in the league in passing yards last season and 6th in rushing. So, yeah, New Orleans is a fantasy juggernaut. Brees is as valuable as any player in today's game. In fact, he's as valuable as any player in any game. Maddeningly enough, he's also the only truly safe fantasy investment on the Saves roster, if you're looking for an every-week score. Let's return to that quote from Brees above, lifted from a terrific piece of football writing. "We're going to try to formation you to death and personnel you to death. If you can accept that statement as truth, then you won't overrate individual Saints for fantasy purposes. If you can't, you're doomed to another year of unmet expectations." Head coach Sean Payton is simply agnostic to player stats. He's not trying to help your fantasy team. At its best, the Saints offense is unreadable in real time. It offers an absurd number of permutations, a ridiculous array of personnel groupings and formations. Sure, the fantasy community might like to see what Pierre Thomas could do with 350 touches, or what Marcus Colston could do with 170 targets, but such workloads would violate a guiding principle of a balanced and unstoppable attack. New Orleans is trying to personnel you to death. They're not trying to Pierre you to death, or Marcus you to death, or Reggie Bush you to death, or Robert Meacham you to death. This offense is unpredictable, bold, and there's depth at the skill spots. Everyone plays. Everyone gets a trophy. Just like Pee Wee football. Stop wishing for all the stats to go to the dude you happen to draft. That's just not how the Saints operate. Brees, as we've already mentioned, is the one top tier every week, no doubt, fantasy asset on New Orleans' roster. You can make a case for Garrett Hartley too, but we generally avoid kickers here. In 2009, Brees set the all-time single-season record in completion percentage, 70.6, and he's just 1 year removed from a 5,000-yard campaign. He hasn't missed a game due to injury in his 4 seasons with the Saints, thanks to the fact that he's only been sacked 16.8 times per year. New Orleans tweaked the run-pass mix last season with great success. So Brees finished with 121 fewer attempts than he had in 2008. However, he still topped 4,300 yards for the 4th straight year, and he matched his career high in passing touchdowns with 34. If you've targeted Brees at the back end of the first round when the elite running backs are off the board, you'll get no argument from me. He's delivered 3 of the top 20 individual fantasy weeks last season, so he's clearly a player who can single-handedly win a matchup for you. The Saints receiver core is again led by Colston, a talented 6'4 wideout coming off a 1,074-yard season. Colston was targeted 106 times last year, the 26th highest total in the league, and he finished with 70 receptions and 9 touchdowns. He reportedly bruised a kidney in the preseason finale, which sounds awful, but apparently won't keep him out of the opener. Robert Meacham has been recovering from toe surgery, but he was active in the final preseason game. 5 catches, 49 yards, no kidney bruising. He was an outstanding fantasy scorer last year, but players don't typically visit the end zone 9 times on just 45 total receptions. It's worth noting that Devery Henderson actually had more catches with 51 and yards 804 than Meacham last season. Henderson was more productive in the playoffs too, 15 receptions, 182 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Lance Moore is still lurking. He had 928 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns in 2008. As was the case with every other roster spot on the Saints offense, the tight end position would have returned a nice profit last year if all the numbers would have gone to one guy. But instead, Jeremy Shockey had 48 receptions for 569 yards and 3 scores, while David Thomas finished with 35 catches, 356 yards, and 1 touchdown. Rookie Jimmy Graham, a third-rounder from Miami, enters the picture this year as well. New Orleans will target the tight end position plenty, but this team likely won't produce a top 12 fantasy commodity. Now that Mike Bell has moved to Philadelphia, many of you have pegged Pierre Thomas as a candidate to make a serious leap in value, and several fantasy analysts have done the same. That could certainly happen, but it should be clear by now that I don't view any Saints running back as a workhorse. This is an offense that spreads the wealth over a large population of players. Realistically, if you're a Thomas owner, you should just hope that he receives the 13 to 16 carries per game that made him a fantasy gem in the second half of 2008. Reggie Bush appears to be in line for at least a modest increase in touches, and he's uncharacteristically healthy right now. And Heisman-less. Christopher Ivory, the unrivaled star of the 2010 preseason, is likely to miss 3 weeks due to an MCL sprain. While he's out, Deshaun Wynn slides it up to third on the depth chart for the Saints. Don't be surprised if he makes a cameo appearance early in the year. No one ever described Bell as being a back who needed to get regular touches, yet New Orleans called his number 176 times last season. The Saints won't roll exclusively with 2 backs all year, and they no doubt see the benefit of having both Bush and Thomas upright when the playoffs begin. Some running back from the discard pile, maybe Wynn, maybe Ivory, maybe even a wilder wild card, will eventually enter the fray. Defensive coordinator Greg Williams really did a remarkable job last season with a less than impressive collection of names. New Orleans ranked 21st against the run and 26th against the pass, but they were an opportunistic and aggressive unit that forced 39 touchdowns, the second highest total in the league. Because of the huge takeaway total, the Saints team defense was a useful fantasy entity. However, safety Darren Sharper, a player who accounted for 9 of the turnovers and 3 defensive touchdowns, will begin the 2010 season on the PUP list. He'll be replaced by second-year defensive back Malcolm Jenkins, a player who isn't likely to display Sharper's insane playmaking talents. The New Orleans IDPs to own are linebacker Jonathan Vilma with 110 tackles in 2009, defensive back Roman Harper with 103 tackles, defensive end Will Smith 49 tackles and 13 sacks, and defensive end Alex Brown 48 tackles, 6 sacks. At last, gamers, we've ranked 31 teams. We're very near the end of this grueling exercise. On Monday, we praise the Green Bay Packers. Adult beverages will be provided, but tomorrow's post is strictly a BYOC, bring your own cheese. Feel free to pre-party in the comments. Just for the record, Bears fan.